A black woman alone in a military freight truck at midnight? Step out before I make this worse. Sergeant Daniel Whitaker's voice cut through the rain like cold metal, loud enough to rise above the rumble of Angela Brooks's engine and the steady hiss of tires passing on the dark Georgia highway. The red and blue lights behind her truck flashed across the wet pavement, breaking the night into sharp pieces of color. Angela sat still behind the wheel, both hands visible, her breathing slow, her eyes fixed on the temperature gauge glowing pale green on the dashboard. 38 degrees. Stable. For now. Behind her, inside the sealed trailer, four insulated medical containers were strapped down beneath federal transport tags, carrying emergency medication bound for Fort McAllister Military Hospital, 32 miles away. The delivery window was narrow. 47 minutes remained before the hospital's cold chain warning became a crisis, and Angela knew better than anyone that numbers did not care about excuses, rain, roadblocks, or pride. Sergeant Whitaker stood outside her driver's side door with his flashlight aimed too high, the beam splashing across her face instead of her license or company logo. Two patrol cars were angled behind the rig, blocking the shoulder as if she had tried to run. A younger officer stood near the rear tires, shifting his weight in the rain, his hand resting near his belt but his expression uncertain. The whole scene felt too bright and too empty at once, a lonely stretch of highway, pine trees bending in the wind, the smell of diesel, wet asphalt, and storm water filling the cab through the cracked window. Angela lowered it only a few inches. "Evening, Sergeant," she said, calm but firm. "My license, registration, cargo manifest, and military transport clearance are in the folder on the passenger seat. I'm reaching for it slowly." Whitaker gave a short laugh, the kind that carried no humor. "I didn't ask for a speech." Angela paused, then picked up the folder with two fingers and held it toward the opening. He did not take it at first. He looked at her uniform jacket, the heavy work gloves beside the cup holder, the silver cross hanging from the mirror, and finally the small wedding band on her left hand. His eyes stayed there a second too long. "This your truck?" he asked. "Yes, sir." "You expect me to believe they put you in charge of military freight?" The question settled in the cab, heavier than the rain. Angela had heard different versions of it at truck stops in Alabama, way stations in Tennessee, loading docks outside Dallas, always wrapped in surprise, suspicion, or that thin smile people used when they wanted disrespect to sound like curiosity. She did not feed it. She only looked past him toward the dark road ahead, toward the mile she still had to cover, toward the hospital waiting for what she carried. "You can verify the seal numbers with dispatch," she said. "But this shipment cannot be opened roadside." Whitaker's face changed. "Not much. Just enough." His jaw tightened, and the flashlight lowered from her eyes to the federal tags clipped to the folder. Rain tapped against the windshield in quick, nervous beats. Somewhere behind her, the trailer's refrigeration unit hummed steadily, doing its job without complaint. Angela wished people could be that simple. Do the work. Hold the line. Protect what matters. Whitaker finally snatched the folder from her hand and flipped it open, pages bending under the rain. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. Angela glanced once more at the dashboard clock. 44 minutes. Then she opened the door, letting the storm rush in. The moment Angela's boots touched the shoulder, cold water climbed around the soles and soaked into the cuffs of her jeans. She closed the truck door gently behind her, careful not to move too fast, careful not to give the man in front of her any reason to turn his suspicion into something worse. The rain was coming sideways now, silver under the patrol lights, tapping against the hood, sliding down the mirrors, dripping from the brim of Sergeant Whitaker's hat as he studied her paperwork with the irritation of a man who had already decided what the truth should look like. Angela Brooks stood straight beside the cab, 5 feet 7 inches of discipline wrapped in a faded navy jacket, her hair tucked beneath a plain black cap, her face calm in the way people sometimes mistook for emptiness. It was not emptiness. It was practice. Long before she became a driver for Meridian Medical Freight, long before she learned the overnight routes between Atlanta, Savannah, Columbus, and the military hospitals scattered across the South, Angela had learned how to stand still while people judged her. She learned it in basic training when men half as capable tested her patience twice as often. She learned it in supply yards where civilian contractors called her sweetheart before realizing she outranked the room in experience. She learned it in grocery store parking lots, at inspection stations, at diners where waitresses set coffee in front of everyone else first. Her father used to say a person could waste a whole life trying to prove they belong to people committed to misunderstanding them. Do the work clean, he told her. Let your character arrive before your anger does. Angela had carried those words across more than 800,000 miles of American road. She carried them through desert heat outside El Paso, through snow near Knoxville, through summer storms that turned Interstate 75 into a river of headlights. She carried them after the funeral of her first child, when silence sat in the house like furniture no one knew how to move. She carried them when her husband, Nathaniel Brooks, stood in dress uniform beside her and offered to make calls, open doors, fix things with one sentence from a world most people never entered. Angela had told him no. She loved him, but she had never wanted his rank to become her shield. If the world only respected her after hearing his name, then it had not respected her at all. So she drove under her own name, signed her own manifests, loaded her own straps, checked her own tires, and kept her marriage private except for the ring that caught light when she shifted gears. That night, the cargo behind her was not just another delivery. For sealed containers of pediatric antiviral medication had been transferred late after a refrigeration failure at a regional depot, and Fort McAllister Military Hospital had called Meridian in a panic. Angela had been off duty, already sitting in her kitchen with a bowl of soup gone cold, when dispatch asked if anyone could make the run through the storm. She had looked at the weather alert flashing on her phone, then at the photograph on the refrigerator of a little boy she had not held in 9 years. She answered before the second ring ended. Now, standing in the rain while Sergeant Whitaker turned page after page as if paperwork could become guilt if handled roughly enough, Angela watched the clock glow inside the cab. 42 minutes. The young officer near the rear of the truck glanced toward the seal numbers, then toward her, his expression softening with uncertainty. Angela noticed everything. The way his shoulders tightened when Whitaker scoffed. The way he looked at the medical emblem on the trailer. The way he seemed young enough to still know the difference between authority and responsibility. Whitaker shut the folder and looked up. Convenient story, he said. Angela kept her voice even. It is not a story, Sergeant. It is a delivery. The wind pushed rain across her cheek, cold and clean, but her eyes did not move from his. Behind her, the refrigeration unit kept humming, steady as a promise. Sergeant Daniel Whitaker had worn the badge for 19 years, long enough for the county to know his name and long enough for him to believe that knowing his name meant respecting him. In Millstone County, people lowered their voices when his cruiser rolled past the gas station, stepped away from their porches when his spotlight swept across their yards, and answered his questions before they understood why they were being asked. He called that order. Others called it surviving the evening. He was 48 years old, broad through the shoulders, with a square jaw, pale eyes, and the kind of stillness that did not come from peace but from control held too tightly for too long. His uniform was always pressed. His boots were always polished. His patrol car was always clean enough to reflect the sky. To the sheriff he was reliable. To his younger officers, he was a lesson in what happened when confidence hardened into contempt. That night every small frustration in his life seemed to gather beneath the brim of his hat. His daughter Lily was in Fort McAllister Military Hospital after a sudden fever had turned serious. His ex-wife had called twice, her voice shaking, asking why the medicine was taking so long. Dispatch had been short-staffed. The storm had flooded 2 county roads. And then just past midnight, a private military freight truck had rolled through his stretch of highway with federal tags, clean paperwork, and a black woman behind the wheel who did not lower her eyes when he spoke. Whitaker did not understand why that bothered him so much, but it did. It pressed on something old and ugly inside him, something he never named because naming it would mean admitting it existed. He flipped through Angela's folder again under the rain, pretending to search for a mistake, but his eyes were not really reading anymore. The documents were too complete. The seal numbers matched the trailer. The manifest listed Meridian medical freight, emergency pediatric medication, priority transfer, Fort McAllister Military Hospital, receiving unit 4. Every line pointed in the same direction. Let her go. But letting her go would mean accepting that she had known the rules better than he had. It would mean stepping back in front of Officer Caleb Ross, who was watching quietly near the rear of the rig, and Deputy Mark Hensley, who stood by the second cruiser with his arms folded and his face hidden under a plastic rain cover. Whitaker felt their eyes even when they tried not to look. He had built his whole life around never appearing uncertain. Angela's calm made his uncertainty louder. "You military?" he asked, his voice flat. Angela answered without hesitation. "Former logistics specialist, United States Army. Honorably discharged." Whitaker gave a faint smile, not kind enough to be called polite. "And now you are driving freight at midnight in a storm." "Yes, Sergeant." "That's supposed to impress me?" "No, sir. It is supposed to explain why I know this cargo cannot be opened here." Caleb looked down at the wet pavement, and Whitaker caught the movement. It felt like embarrassment, and embarrassment was something he never allowed to sit on his side of the road. He stepped closer to Angela, close enough that the brim of his hat threw a shadow across his face. "You are very comfortable telling officers what they can and cannot do." Angela held the folder between them, rainwater running from the edge of the plastic cover. "I am comfortable protecting medical cargo that people are waiting for." For a second only the storm answered. Tires hissed by in the far lane. Pine branches swayed beyond the shoulder, black against the bruised gray sky. Somewhere down the highway thunder rolled soft and distant, like a warning no one wanted to hear. Whitaker looked past her at the trailer, at the locked seal, at the refrigeration unit humming as steady as a church organ under the rain. He knew he should call dispatch, verify the paperwork and clear the road. He knew it with the same clarity he knew the weight of the badge on his chest. But pride moved faster than judgment. "Caleb," he said without taking his eyes off Angela, "run her license again. Then check the cab." Angela's face changed for the first time. Not fear. Not anger. Just a quiet tightening around the eyes, the look of someone watching a door close that should have stayed open. "Sergeant," she said, low and careful, "every minute you hold this truck here matters." Whitaker folded the folder under his arm. "Then I guess you should have thought about that before making me suspicious." Angela looked at him through the rain, and the sadness in her expression was worse than defiance. It was recognition. She had met men like him before, men who confused obedience with respect and suspicion with instinct. Behind them, Officer Caleb hesitated beside the truck, one hand lifted toward the cab door but not yet touching it. The clock inside the dashboard glowed through the rain-specked glass. 39 minutes remained. Officer Caleb Ross stood beside the truck with rain running off the bill of his cap, his hand still hovering near the cab door. He was 26, only 3 years into the department, young enough to remember academy instructors saying that authority was supposed to protect the public, not corner it. He looked through the glass and saw nothing threatening inside Angela's cab. A paper coffee cup sat in the holder. A folded road atlas rested on the passenger seat beneath a small flashlight. A lunch bag, a pair of winter gloves, a fuel receipt from Macon, and a photograph tucked into the edge of the dashboard, faded at the corners, showing Angela in an army uniform beside an older black man with the same steady eyes. Caleb swallowed. "Sergeant," he said carefully, "the paperwork appears complete. We could verify the seal through dispatch without opening anything." Whitaker turned his head slowly, and the look he gave Caleb made the younger officer's voice die in the rain. Angela noticed the moment. She saw Caleb step back into silence, saw Deputy Hensley pretend to check his radio, saw the whole roadside arrange itself around one man's pride. She had seen rooms like this before, except they had been motor pools, supply offices, warehouse docks, places where one loud person made everyone else smaller. But the medicine behind her was bigger than pride, bigger than fear, bigger than the insult pressing against her ribs. She took one slow breath and lifted her chin. "Sergeant Whitaker," she said, each word measured so it could not be mistaken for panic, "I am formally asking you to contact Meridian Medical Freight Dispatch, Fort McAllister Receiving Unit 4, or the Federal Transport Verification Line printed on page 2 of that manifest. Any one of them can confirm my route, my cargo, and the seal numbers within minutes." Whitaker's mouth tightened. "You do not get to give instructions here." "I am not giving instructions," Angela said. "I am giving you the fastest lawful way to protect the people waiting on this delivery." A gust of wind pushed rain between them. The patrol lights flashed over Angela's face, red then blue, making her look carved out of shadow and steel. For a moment the highway seemed to hold its breath. Whitaker opened the folder again, found the page she mentioned, and saw the number exactly where she said it would be. That should have ended it. Instead, it made him angrier. He jabbed a finger toward the trailer. I want that seal. Opened. Angela's eyes moved to the silver seal locking the rear doors, stamped with a number that matched the manifest and the hospital request. No, Sergeant. The word was quiet. Struck harder because of that. Caleb looked up. Hensley shifted near the cruiser. Whitaker stared at her as if she had stepped across an invisible line. Angela continued before he could raise his voice. That seal protects temperature control, chain of custody, and sterile handling. If it is broken on the roadside, the shipment may be rejected. If the shipment is rejected, the hospital loses medication it does not have time to replace. I will not help turn a delay into a medical failure. Whitaker gave a low, humorless laugh. You think you are the only person who cares about a hospital tonight? Something flickered across his face when he said it, too quick for most people to catch. Angela caught it. Pain maybe. Worry. A private fear wearing the mask of authority. Her voice softened, but her stance did not. Then you understand why minutes matter. Whitaker looked away first, toward the wet road, toward the passing headlights blurred by rain. His radio crackled, but he ignored it. Angela turned slightly toward Caleb. Officer Ross, please look at the refrigeration monitor on the side panel. You do not have to touch the cargo. Just read the display. Caleb hesitated, then glanced at Whitaker. No permission came. Only silence. Finally, he moved to the side of the trailer and wiped rain from the small digital screen. 38 degrees, he called. Stable. Angela nodded. That is the safe range. But the longer we sit, the more risk we create when transfer time is shortened. Whitaker stepped between them. Enough. His voice was sharper now, not loud but edged with embarrassment. Angela looked back at him, rain slipping from her cap, her hands open at her sides. Sergeant, I have driven through 2 flooded exits, 1 detour, and 27 miles of storm to keep that medicine viable. I will answer every legal question you have. I will wait while you verify every number. But I will not consent to breaking that seal because you do not like the person delivering it. The words landed clean. Caleb went still. Hensley stopped pretending not to listen. Even Whitaker seemed to feel the weight of them, because for 1 second, his face lost its certainty. Then pride rushed back in. He closed the folder slowly, tucked it under his arm, and pointed toward the front of the patrol car. Stand over there while we sort this out. Angela glanced through the rain at the dashboard clock glowing inside her cab. 35 minutes remained. She walked where he pointed not because she accepted his judgment, but because she refused to let his behavior steal hers. Angela stood near the front of the patrol car while the storm gathered strength around her, turning the shoulder into a narrow strip of black water and trembling light. The hood of the cruiser was slick with rain, reflecting the red and blue flashes in broken waves. She kept her hands where everyone could see them, not because she had done anything wrong, but because she understood the fragile mathematics of roadside fear. One wrong movement could become a story someone else told badly. Sergeant Whitaker stood 10 feet away with her folder tucked under his arm, speaking into his shoulder radio in a voice low enough that the rain swallowed half of it. He was not calling the verification line. Angela could tell by the rhythm of his words, by the way he kept glancing at her instead of the manifest, by the hard set of his shoulders. He was building a reason to keep control. Deputy Hensley searched the outside of the cab with a flashlight, moving slowly along the steps, fuel tank, and side compartments, finding nothing but chains, safety triangles, a spare tarp, and the ordinary tools of a working driver. Officer Caleb Ross remained by the trailer, close enough to hear the refrigeration unit, close enough to see the digital monitor still glowing 38 degrees through the rain. His face was tense now. The longer they stayed, the harder it became to pretend this was routine. Angela looked past him through the dark toward the direction of Fort McAllister. Somewhere beyond the curtain of storm, nurses were checking clocks. A doctor was probably calling pharmacy again. A child was lying under white hospital blankets while adults tried not to let their voices shake. Angela did not know that child's name yet. She only knew the shape of waiting. She knew how hospital rooms sounded at 2 in the morning, when machines hummed softly and every footstep in the hallway made your heart lift and fall. She knew what it felt like to sit beside a small bed and bargain silently with God for one more hour, one more breath, one more chance. That memory moved through her chest like a hand closing around old glass. She pushed it down and focused on the clock inside the cab. 31 minutes. Whitaker walked back toward her, rain dripping from the edge of her folder. "Dispatch is busy," he said. Angela looked at him carefully. "The federal verification number is direct." "I said they are busy." "Then call Fort McAllister Receiving Unit 4. The number is on the manifest." His eyes hardened. "You really do not know when to stop." Angela's voice stayed low. "I know exactly when to stop, Sergeant. I stop when the medicine is delivered." Hensley let out a small breath that might have been a laugh, might have been discomfort. Whitaker heard it either way. His face tightened. "You think that uniform jacket and some official words make you special?" Angela glanced down at her faded jacket. The old army patch had been removed years ago, but the outline of the stitching was still there if someone looked closely. "No," she said. "I think the cargo makes this urgent. People like you always hide behind paperwork when questions start." The sentence struck the air with a quiet ugliness. Caleb's head lifted. Even Hensley stopped moving. Angela did not answer right away. The rain ran down her temples, under her collar, along the line of her jaw. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady enough to make Whitaker look away for half a second. "People like me learn to keep paperwork perfect, because people like you look for reasons not to believe us." The words were not shouted. They did not need to be. They landed on the wet pavement between them, clean and undeniable. Whitaker's jaw worked once, then stilled. For a moment, Angela saw the choice in front of him. He could step back. He could make the call. He could turn this night into an inconvenience instead of a wound. But pride, once fed, rarely leaves hungry. He turned to Caleb. "Secure her while we continue the inspection." Caleb froze. "Sergeant, she has been cooperative." That was not a suggestion. Angela closed her eyes for one brief second, not in fear, but in grief for how small people could become when given a little power. Then she opened them and extended her wrists forward before anyone touched her, offering dignity where none had been offered to her. Caleb approached slowly, his face pale beneath the patrol lights. "Ma'am," he whispered, barely audible under the rain. "I am sorry." Angela looked at him, and there was no bitterness in her eyes. "Then remember how this feels," she said. The restraints clicked softly, not painfully, but loudly enough to change the night. Angela stood beneath the storm with her shoulders straight, her wedding ring catching a flash of blue light, while the truck behind her kept humming, loyal and helpless. Inside the cab, the dashboard clock turned over. 29 minutes remained. The soft click of the restraints seemed to make the rain quieter for a moment, as if even the storm had paused to understand what had just happened. Angela stood beside the cruiser with her wrists held carefully in front of her, shoulders squared, chin lifted, water slipping from the edge of her cap and darkening the collar of her jacket. She could feel the cold settling into her sleeves, into the thin space between skin and metal, into the tired places of her body that had already carried too many long nights and too many miles. But she did not bend. She looked at the truck instead. The trailer lights glowed red through the rain, steady and patient, and the refrigeration unit kept humming with that low mechanical faithfulness that almost sounded like breathing. 29 minutes had become 27. Officer Caleb Ross stepped back from her, his hands dropping slowly to his sides. His face looked younger now, stripped of the certainty that came with a uniform. He glanced toward Sergeant Whitaker, then toward the side monitor on the trailer, then back at Angela. "Sergeant," he said, careful but firmer than before, "we should call the hospital directly." Whitaker did not turn around. He was standing near the rear doors, studying the seal as if staring at it long enough might make it guilty. "I told you to continue the inspection." "We have inspected everything we can inspect without breaking the seal," Caleb said. Deputy Hensley looked sharply at him, surprised by the sound of resistance coming from the youngest man on the shoulder. Whitaker finally faced them, his expression flat and cold under the flashing lights. "Officer Ross, do you want to explain to me why you are arguing procedure on my stop?" Caleb swallowed, but his eyes moved to Angela. She gave him the smallest shake of her head. Not because she wanted him silent, but because she understood what courage cost when someone else signed your evaluation. Still, Caleb took off his rain jacket and stepped toward her. "She is soaked," he said. "At least let her stand under the overhang of the trailer." "Leave it," Whitaker snapped. Caleb stopped with the jacket in his hands. Angela saw the humiliation flicker across his face, the painful little moment when decency was treated like disobedience. And somehow, even standing restrained in the rain, she felt sorry for him. Not pity. Recognition. Young people learned either to protect what was soft in them or to bury it before men like Whitaker mocked it out of existence. Angela turned her palms upward slightly, letting rainwater run along her fingers. "Thank you, Officer Ross," she said softly. "Do not lose that part of yourself." Caleb's eyes lifted to hers. The words reached him in a place no order could. He looked away quickly, blinking against the rain. Angela closed her eyes for one breath. In the darkness behind her eyelids, she was not on the highway anymore. She was back in a hospital room years earlier, holding a tiny blue blanket while a nurse adjusted a quiet monitor beside the bed. She remembered the smell of antiseptic, warm plastic, and coffee that had been sitting too long. She remembered Nathaniel's hand over hers, large and trembling, his uniform sleeve brushing her wrist as he whispered that she did not have to be strong every second. She had wanted to believe him, but grief had taught her that strength was not a wall. It was a bridge you kept rebuilding while the river tried to take it. When she opened her eyes, the highway returned, bright and wet and unforgiving. Whitaker was speaking again, telling Hensley to check the locking mechanism, telling Caleb to stop hovering, telling the night to obey him because everything else in his life had refused. Angela heard his words, but she listened past them, past the rain, past the passing tires, past the cold. She listened for the hum of the trailer, that small stubborn sound keeping hope alive in 4 sealed containers. 25 minutes. Her phone was still in the cab, mounted beside the dashboard, screen dark. Nathaniel had called twice earlier while she was loading in Atlanta, and she had let both calls go unanswered because she knew his schedule, knew the base reception was beginning before dawn, knew he would hear the storm in her voice and worry. She had sent one message before leaving. Routine run. Home soon. It was the kind of lie married people told each other when love needed rest more than truth needed witnesses. Now she looked at the ring on her finger, blurred by rain and flashing blue light, and wondered whether he had gone to sleep believing her. The radio on Sergeant Whitaker's shoulder crackled once, then again, sharp against the rain. He slapped the button without looking away from the sealed trailer. "Whitaker." A dispatcher's voice came through, broken by static and storm. "Sergeant, Fort McAllister is requesting location update on a delayed medical transfer. Meridian Unit 732. Priority pediatric shipment. Do you have contact with that vehicle?" The whole shoulder went still. Deputy Hensley lowered his flashlight. Caleb turned slowly toward Angela. Whitaker's eyes moved to the number printed on the side of the truck, then to the manifest under his arm, then to Angela standing wet and restrained beside his cruiser. For the first time that night, his certainty cracked wide enough for fear to show through. "Repeat that," he said. The dispatcher's voice returned, clearer now. "Fort McAllister receiving Unit 4 says the medication is needed immediately. Patient is a minor in critical care. Name on hospital request is Lily Whitaker. They are asking if you can confirm the truck's status." The name hit the roadside harder than thunder. Whitaker did not move. The rain ran down his face, but he no longer seemed to feel it. His daughter's name hung in the flashing air between him and Angela, small and fragile and impossible to push aside. Caleb's lips parted slightly. Hensley looked at the ground. Angela closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, not with satisfaction, not with anger, but with a deep sadness that seemed to pass through her and into the wet pavement beneath her boots. So that was the child. That was the little life waiting behind white hospital walls while pride stood on a highway pretending to be law. Whitaker's hand rose slowly to the radio, but his voice came out thin. "Confirm patient name." "Lily Whitaker," the dispatcher said. 8 years old. Fort McAllister Pediatric Isolation Wing. The receiving physician says the temperature window is narrowing. Angela looked through the rain at the dashboard clock. 23 minutes. Her voice was quiet. Sergeant, you need to let me go. Whitaker stared at her as if he had never really seen her until that moment. Not as a driver. Not as a black woman alone on the road. Not as someone he believed he could doubt into submission. He saw a person carrying the one thing his daughter needed, and the realization drained the color from his face. Before he could answer, another set of headlights appeared beyond the curve, low and controlled, moving through the storm with military precision. Then another. Then 3 more. Black government vehicles rolled onto the shoulder behind the patrol cars, their tires cutting clean lines through the water. The doors opened almost at once. Men and women in dark rain gear stepped out first, followed by a tall black man in a dress uniform partly covered by a long military coat. Even in the storm, even under the fractured patrol lights, the 4 silver stars on his shoulders caught the night like lightning that refused to fade. General Nathaniel Brooks walked past the cruisers without hurry, his face calm in the way mountains are calm before weather breaks around them. No one asked who he was. Every uniform on that shoulder seemed to understand at the same time. Caleb straightened instinctively. Hensley took 1 step back. Whitaker stood frozen, Angela's folder still tucked beneath his arm like evidence of his own failure. Nathaniel did not look at Whitaker first. He went straight to Angela. His eyes moved over her wet jacket, her restrained wrists, the cold in her face, and something deep tightened behind his controlled expression. He removed his military coat and placed it gently around her shoulders, careful, almost reverent, as if the whole highway had narrowed to the space between his hands and the woman he loved. Angela, he said softly, using the voice of a husband, not a general. Are you hurt? Angela looked up at him, and for the first time all night, her composure trembled at the edges. No, she said. But the medicine is late. Nathaniel nodded once, accepting the answer because he knew her. Duty first. Pain later. He turned then, slowly, toward Sergeant Whitaker. The rain struck his coat, slid over the stars on his shoulders, and fell silently to the ground. Whitaker's mouth opened, but no words came. Nathaniel's voice remained low. Remove the restraints from my wife. Caleb moved before Whitaker could speak, unlocking them with hands that shook slightly. Angela rubbed one wrist, not from injury, but from cold, then stepped toward the truck. Whitaker finally found his voice, barely more than a whisper. General Brooks, I did not know. Angela stopped beside the cab door and looked back at him. The flashing lights crossed her face. Red then blue, grief then strength. That was the problem, Sergeant, she said. You thought you needed to know who I belonged to before treating me like a human being. The words left him silent. Behind them the trailer hummed on. 21 minutes remained. Angela climbed into the cab with Nathaniel's coat heavy around her shoulders and the cold still sitting in her bones. Her fingers moved with practice speed, checking the dashboard, the temperature gauge, the route screen, the hospital clock. 21 minutes. The number glowed back at her like a final warning. Outside, the highway had changed without moving at all. The same rain fell, the same patrol lights flashed, the same truck hummed on the shoulder. But every person standing there understood that the center of power had shifted. Sergeant Whitaker no longer looked like a man guarding the law. He looked like a father who had just realized his own pride had stood between his child and mercy. General Nathaniel Brooks stepped toward him, his voice controlled, but the quiet inside it was heavier than anger. Sergeant, my team will document this stop, your delay of federally sealed medical cargo, and the condition in which my wife was held. You will provide your badge number, your supervisor's contact, and every communication made since this truck was pulled over. Whitaker nodded too quickly. Yes, sir. His eyes kept moving toward the truck, toward Angela, toward the road leading to Fort McAllister. General, my daughter? His voice broke before he could finish. Nathaniel looked at him for a long second. Your daughter is why this truck is leaving now. Whitaker swallowed hard, then stepped toward Angela's cab, rain running down his face in uneven streams. Mrs. Brooks, he said, the name sounding strange in his mouth now that respect had arrived late. I am sorry. I did not know it was Lily. I did not know who you were. Angela looked down at him from the driver's seat, one hand on the wheel, the other resting near the gearshift. The heater had begun to push warm air against her wet sleeves, but her expression stayed steady. You keep saying that, she said. But I told you what the cargo was. I told you where it was going. I told you someone was waiting. Whitaker's mouth opened, then closed. No defense came. Angela leaned slightly toward the window, her voice low enough that only the people closest could hear. Your daughter does not need my anger right now. She needs this medicine. Move your cars. The simplicity of it seemed to undo him more than any punishment could have. Whitaker turned at once, waving Hensley toward the second cruiser, shouting, "For the lane to be cleared, for the roadblock to open, for everyone to move with the urgency he should have had from the beginning." Caleb hurried to the rear of the truck and checked the side monitor one more time. 38 degrees, he called. Still stable. Angela nodded once, then looked at him through the rain. Thank you, Officer Ross. Caleb stood straighter, as if the words had given him back something he had almost lost. Nathaniel came to the driver's side step and placed one hand against the doorframe. For a second, the general disappeared, and only the husband remained. I can have someone else drive, he said softly. Angela shook her head. No. I started the run. I will finish it. He studied her face, saw the exhaustion, the cold, the old grief she had hidden under discipline, and he did not argue. That was part of loving Angela Brooks, knowing when help meant stepping aside. He reached through the open window and touched her hand once, brief and warm. Then I will follow you in. Angela put the truck in gear. The engine gave a deep, familiar pull beneath her boots. Ahead, the patrol cars rolled away from the shoulder, their lights sliding across the wet road like colors being washed from glass. Whitaker stood beside his cruiser, smaller now, watching the woman he had doubted carry his hope into the storm. As Angela eased the truck back onto the highway, she did not look at him with triumph. She looked only at the road, the clock, and the rain rushing into her headlights. 19 minutes remained, and kindness had no time to celebrate being right. Angela drove through the storm as if the road itself had become a narrow promise she refused to break. The wipers swept hard across the windshield, left to right, pushing sheets of rain aside just long enough for the next stretch of highway to appear. Behind her, Nathaniel's convoy followed at a steady distance, dark vehicles moving with quiet discipline through the night. The patrol cars stayed farther back now, their flashing lights no longer commanding the road, only trailing it. Angela did not think about Sergeant Whitaker. She did not think about the cold still trapped in her sleeves or the marks the restraints had left in her memory more than on her skin. She thought about the numbers. 12 miles. 15 minutes. 38 degrees. Stable. The trailer hummed behind her, and each mile marker she passed felt like a small act of mercy. Fort McAllister Military Hospital rose out of the rain with its emergency entrance lit white against the black sky. 2 nurses and a pharmacy technician were already waiting under the covered receiving bay when Angela backed the trailer in with smooth precision. The moment the wheels stopped, the team moved fast. Seal checked. Number confirmed. Doors opened under supervision. Containers transferred onto a rolling medical cart. The digital monitor still read 38 degrees. The technician looked at Angela with relief so sudden it almost looked like tears. You made it, he said. Angela stepped down from the cab, Nathaniel's coat still over her shoulders, and watched the cart disappear through the automatic doors. She did not smile right away. She just stood beneath the overhang, listening to the rain drum against the roof, letting the sound wash through the silence that came after urgency. Nathaniel came to stand beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. He did not ask if she was all right. Not yet. He knew the answer would take time. Inside, beyond the glass, people moved quickly under fluorescent lights. A doctor signed a form. A nurse carried one of the containers down the hall. Somewhere on the pediatric floor, a little girl named Lily Whitaker was still breathing, still waiting, still possible. Dawn arrived pale and slow over Fort McAllister, turning the wet parking lot silver. Angela sat alone in a quiet hallway outside the pediatric wing, holding a paper cup of coffee that had gone lukewarm in her hands. Nathaniel was down the corridor with hospital administration and military legal officers, making sure the report would be complete. Not loud, not cruel, but complete. Sergeant Whitaker arrived just after sunrise without his hat. His uniform looked clean, but the man inside it looked changed in a way no laundry could fix. He stopped several feet from Angela, holding his badge in one hand and a small stuffed rabbit in the other. Through the window behind him, Lily slept in a hospital bed, color slowly returning to her face, her mother seated beside her with both hands folded around the child's fingers. Whitaker looked at Angela, then at the floor. "She is alive because of you," he said. Angela did not answer at first. The hallway smelled of coffee, raincoats, and antiseptic. A floor buffer hummed somewhere far away. Morning light reached across the tile and touched the edge of her boots. Whitaker's voice lowered. "I am resigning pending the investigation. I know that does not fix what I did." Angela stood slowly. For a moment he seemed to expect a speech, maybe forgiveness, maybe anger, maybe the kind of sentence that would tell him where to place his shame. But Angela had spent too much of her life carrying other people's lessons for them. She walked past him to the small table outside Lily's room and set down a wrapped peppermint candy from her jacket pocket, the kind nurses kept near the reception desk for children brave enough to swallow bitter medicine. Then she turned back to Whitaker. "Make sure she grows up in a world where she does not have to know who someone is before she treats them with dignity." Whitaker lowered his head. Angela did not wait for more. She walked down the hallway toward the exit, where Nathaniel stood in the morning light, his coat open, his eyes soft with pride and sorrow. Outside, the storm had passed. Her truck waited in the lot, streaked with mud, silver under the sunrise, ordinary and beautiful. Angela climbed into the cab, placed both hands on the wheel, and sat for one quiet breath before starting the engine. No applause followed her. No crowd gathered. Only the flag above the hospital lifted in the clean wet wind, and the road ahead opened bright and empty, as if justice had finally learned how to be silent.